G'day everybody, hope you're all doing well, hope you're all hanging in there alright. I wanted to do a video today because you've probably all heard that meme about how it's over, referring to, if you're a man and you were born unattractive, then if you're born below a certain looks threshold, then it's never going to happen for you, romantically, whatever, right? You're never going to find a girlfriend. You're never going to find a wife. You're never going to have children. That it's a wrap. It's over, That's the meme, right? Well, if we were to put aside blue-pilled kind of normie thinking about how there's someone for everybody and that you just haven't met the right girl yet and all of that kind of stuff, if we accept the kind of black pill premise that it is over for some dudes by definition, or at least in the cultural contexts of the society that you live in, if we kind of accept the fact that there are haves and have-nots in the kind of dating market that we have, then how do you know if it is over for you? How do you know for sure if there's still a chance for you? Because, no one wants to give up when there's still a chance, right? And this is one of the reasons why a lot of guys get sucked into like dating courses and whatnot, because some guys get told by the white pill salesman of the world that, oh, you're just being negative. Oh, you shouldn't be giving up ahead of your time. And there is some truth to that, like a 17-year-old in high school that ends up on one of those incelibate forums. It's like, dude, you've still got time. Just because you didn't peak when you were in high school doesn't mean that you can't make up for it. So, there is room for improvement. There is time to ascend. But how do you know if you're not in that camp? How do you know that it really is over for you? Because, if you are like a 3 out of 10 and you're like 45 years old, it probably is time to give up. But at the same time, you don't want to give up prematurely. So how do you navigate this forest? And what do you do when it is over? When you have kind of realized that the game's up? Then what? And by the way, like I said, I'm coming at this video from a very male-centric perspective, but this could also apply to women with things like fertility, never going to have children. A lot of women get caught up in their 20s of being like the serial monogamist kind of girl that wants a permanent boyfriend, the forever boyfriend, but never wants to settle down. And when they get to like 35, 40, they have to deal with their own version of it being over. But that's kind of a separate video. Like, I'm more coming at it from a kind of male perspective of simply not being good enough for the current dating market. That's pretty much where I'm coming at it from. The not being good looking enough, the being too aspie, all of that sort of thing. So the footage that you're seeing now is footage that was uploaded to YouTube, not by me, but by some normie, which was taken in Surfers Paradise, which is about 30 kilometers from where I live. It's no secret that I live in the Gold Coast kind of hinterland area, right? And it was taken on a Friday or Saturday night, I can't remember. And basically it's like it's a lens into normie land. And I love how the footage is taken from a camera that is about the height of what a turbo manlet would see the world. Like, this footage is taken from about 5 feet in the air, which is kind of, or maybe 4'5" in the air, which is kind of symbolic of like a turbo manlet's doomer night walk. Everyone's hype-mogging him. Now I'm starting to kind of like add my own sort of narrative to this video, but he's being face-mogged by everybody. He's being police presence mogged. And that's what it's going to be like for a lot of guys when they go out on a weekend. They go out by themselves and they got told that Tinder's not real life, bro. You've got to go out there and cold approach because, women can be as superficial as they want on Tinder. But, a lot of guys, they have better success in person. So, don't let your anxiety rule you. Go out on a weekend and cold approach, bro. But you see, the only problem with this advice is that if you actually go out to one of these normie wonderlands, right, then you're going to be kind of confronted with the fact that when you see these women, they're usually either with their boyfriends or surrounded by their beta orbiter kind of white knight sort of friends that will block you. You'll become like a jester that they'll make fun of as soon as you get rejected. Like, oh my God, that was so weird when that random manlet came up to you, Stacey, and she's laughing, and the Beckies alongside her are all laughing that you cold approached, thinking that you had a chance, and there are women that exist together in cliques, and occasionally you'll see a woman who's by herself. You'll see some girl on her phone, but she's usually just waiting for her boyfriend to come out of the bathroom or for her friends to come out of the club, and she doesn't want to be interrupted by some sub-5 coming up to her, even a sub-8, let alone a sub-5. She just isn't going to be interested, basically. Now again, a guy who's like an 8.5 or a 9 out of 10, he can probably go out by himself, eventually find some girl who's just sitting by herself, maybe waiting for her friend, and go talk to her, and probably, he's got a good, decent chance of picking up a girl, because, I have spoken to girls that said that, I was waiting for my friend, and this hot guy came up to me, and, he ended up coming back with me and my friend to the hotel. I have heard that happen, but, that's usually a giga chad. A normie who's like a neurotypical 5.5 out of 10 normie who's with his friends, he's got an outside chance, but, he has to have the perfect kind of setup. He's got to have the right friends, he's got to be well-dressed, he's got to have good social skills, and even he has to spend a lot of time doing a lot of approaches before it pays off. And, it's arguable that it's not even worth it for him, right? But as for the sub-5, the 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10, people say, these guys sitting in their room, these black pillars sitting in their room, analyzing Tinder statistics, they need to leave their bedrooms. And you look at this type of footage and you think, why leave the bedroom? You look at this type of footage and you think, you know what? I think I'd rather just sit in my room. I don't think that going out to one of these kinds of places is preferable to sitting in my room and doing something that, even on a micro level, is actually productive. Like, it's actually less productive to go out to one of these places on a Saturday night. Of course, I'm talking about from the perspective of being a sub-5 male. Like, I can understand Chad wanting to go out to one of these places, or Tyrone, or whatever dumb metaphor you want to use. I can understand a guy who's very good looking wanting to go out to one of these places, because he really can go up to that girl. Even then, people say, you don't need to be confident. It's 100% about looks. But, I think even for a good-looking guy, it takes some degree of confidence to go up to some girl who's with her friends, or, surrounded by her beta orbiters, and try and, get her number or pick her up that night. It does take some level of, like, not coming across as a weirdo. But, I can understand that for a very good-looking guy, it might not be a waste of time. But even then, there is still some risk, You might be a giga chad, but if you go up to a girl who's got a boyfriend and her boyfriend is a psycho, he might not care about your pretty face. He might just be a loose cannon. He might be drunk. So even if you are good-looking, there's still a risk, let alone if you're a normie, let alone if you're sub-normie. You're a 5'3" recessed chin kind of guy. You just look at this and you almost just write it off, basically. And with regards to actually going into one of these places, this was filmed in a different location. With regards to actually going into one of these nightclubs, like the actual club itself, I mean, at that point you really are going into the lion's den, or more accurately, you're going into Chad's den at that point. Now, that's not to say that as a normie, a guy can't go in there. The clubs do allow for 5 and 6 out of 10 guys to go in there, but they usually have to follow the rules. They have to go in there with their girlfriends or as a tag along to a bigger group of more attractive girls, because they want the women to go in there. And the club owners are willing to have a few guys in there, a few normies, if they're bringing in their female friends, like the gay friend is allowed in, that sort of thing. They allow a little bit of diversity, but if you're a sub-5 and you go in there alone, they really don't want you in there unless you're spending a lot of money. But even then, you actually bring down its reputation. Like, I despise the concept of how nightclubs kind of operate. I don't mean to suggest that I don't enjoy, occasionally going to one of these bars or clubs or whatever if I'm drunk or you're just in the mood to do that type of thing. Like, even when I was 18, me and my friends, when I first left home, would go clubbing and everything. And I tolerated the dress codes and the superficial attitudes from the bouncers about who can get in and whatnot. And, I don't think I've ever paid money to get into a club. But if a club's free, I'm not saying I'm not partial to it if I'm in the right mood. But, if you're a sub-5 male, in only very, very rare circumstances would I recommend going into one of these venues, because ultimately it's just, it's just they're set up in a way that it's like you're not really designed to be there. That's just kind of how it is. So let's do a quick recap of the video so far, shall we? So we've established that street game as a sub-5 male probably has a higher risk than reward kind of ratio. Like, best case scenario, you'll get a whole bunch of rejections, Worst case scenario, you'll either wind up in jail or face first onto the street when some thug boyfriend catches you talking to his girl outside of a bar while he's coming out of the bathroom. So we know that street game's kind of a dicey thing to get into as any guy who's, a low-tier normie or worse. And we know that going into a bar or a club, they're just not set up for sub-5s. That's just the way it is. They're just not set up for the below-average looking dude for the most part. I mean, I was high average at my peak, and even then I think I only probably ever picked up a couple of girls over the years in clubs. They're brutal. They're harsh places. But here's the kicker to the entire video, right? The title of the video is Knowing When It's Over, and you don't know when it's over until you give it a try. And this is where I would say that a little bit of looks maxing, a little bit of, confidence maxing, you should never buy a course. Do not pay, unless you're a multimillionaire with, a massive amount of disposable income. Do not pay anyone money to learn how to develop some social skills, okay? This can all be done through your own means, okay? But at the same time, learning how to go up to a girl and talk to her, knowing how to just be a normal person in a public place is definitely something I'd recommend learning. And therefore, and I know I've said this a million times already, but please don't take these videos as like some defeatist prescription on why you should give up, okay? That's, again, I always try and do the opposite of these videos. Like, sometimes the normies will stumble across them and they'll say, oh, CBP, you're making me feel depressed. And it's like, why? I might come across in my videos as sounding depressed, but I'm not depressed at all. I know where I stand, which is not very high, but I know where I stand. It's not that I'm depressed. All I'm doing is trying to invite realism and introspection. And, you don't know it's over until it's over. So I always recommend looks maxing as much as possible. But, in saying that, though, you might not be cut out to go to these types of places because, like I said before, they are kind of brutal. They are a kind of normie wonderland. And, I think it takes a special type of mood, a special type of energy to really enjoy going to one of these places that you see here. But, if you do decide to give the clubbing scene a go and you don't have any confidence, the key word here would be courage, okay? Doing something that a confident person would do when you're not confident is called courage, okay? Where the risks might actually outweigh the reward, but you decide to commit to the possibility of the reward. That's courage now. But hey, let's say you've given nightclubs the good college effort. Well, what comes next? What is the next option? Well, obviously dating apps are a big thing nowadays. Now, the results that I did have were back in the 2000s before the introduction of these kind of streamlined apps that make it as almost exclusively about looks, right? Because at the end of the day, if you give 3 guys the same bio, one of them's good looking, one of them's average looking, and one of them's below average looking, and you give them the same generic bio about what they do, their hobbies are, we all know how it's going to go. We all know it's going to be proportional to your looks. And one of the things I discovered when going on Tinder as myself, as an average guy, and then going on Tinder as a Chad and testing the results, is that sometimes I would swipe on the same girl, both as me and as a Chad. And when the Chad would say, what are you looking for? She'd be like, oh, I'm not looking to settle down. I'm just looking to have a bit of fun, all of that sort of thing. But when I would go on Tinder as the real me and match with that same girl, she would tell me that she's looking for a relationship and would almost seem offended at the idea of a guy just wanting to have a bit of fun with her. She would seem, if you said to her, oh, until you get a boyfriend, because I'd already matched with her as Chad and spoken to her about her escapades of meeting randoms. When I would swipe under the real me and say, have you hooked up with any guys just for fun? She would come across as like, ooh, no, what do you think I am? It was like you'd swipe with 2 different people, but it was the same person, the same bio, everything. Like it was them, same photos. And it was just quite amazing, the kind of cognitive disconnect there. And as a kind of almost addendum to the video, guys do this as well, because I've done this. You see, I've spoken to certain girls over the years who you would describe as being like a little bit kind of blonzilla-ish. You know, they're a little bit overweight, they're a little bit out there, very kind of extroverted, and they write on their bio, right, that they're not looking for a one-night stand. Oh, no, don't you dare ask me for a one-night stand. But to a guy who only uses Tinder to hook up, right, who may be kind of slumming it, you know, lowering his standards just to get something, when he sees a girl who's like, you know, a little overweight, got a few tattoos on her, and she says, I'm not looking for a one-night stand, in the guy's mind, that says, okay, this girl's been ran through, and, you know, I'm not going to date this girl, but I might be able to twist her arm into having one with me, you know, like, hey, I understand you're looking for a boyfriend now. I understand that you're tired of sleeping around, but, you know, why not have one for the road? And then after you hook up with me, then you can start looking for your next boyfriend. Then you can settle down. So if I was coaching a girl, which I don't do coaching, but if I was coaching a girl who doesn't want to be treated as an object on Tinder, don't write in your bio that you're not looking for a one-night stand. You know, just put a normal bio, and if a guy kind of hints that that's what he wants, then you can pretend to act offended. But, you know, there's these subtle clues that we read into in people's language and photos and way of describing themselves. And yeah, my point is, women do this as well. Everyone does it. Women do it too. They'll match with one guy who's good looking, and they'll put him in a particular category of what they want to do with him, and then they'll match with an average guy and have their own idea of what type of relationship they want with him. Everyone does this, and you need to be aware of it. But, you know, moving on from that, let's say you're a guy on Tinder, and you've been doing this for the longest time, and it's just not been worth it. It's not been a good investment of your time. You're not getting matches. You're not getting, you know, anything. What is the next option that you could do? What's next in line? So if you're a guy and you find that nightclubs are a total waste of time, that dating apps were a waste of time, then the next option you have is trying to meet people through IRL, in real life, meaning, you know, university, through friends of friends, or any other various way that you can possibly meet people in real life. That's kind of the next option in line. It's considerably slower, and it comes with its own risks and rewards, but, you know, it is one idea. Now, I'll be honest, it's not one that I've used all that much throughout the course of my life, mostly on account of the fact that I've never been one to get lonely per se. It's more of a case that, you know, if I'm at university or if I'm at work, I like to be around people. I like to get along with people so I know what's happening and don't feel like a complete loner. But if I'm not forced to show up to an institution every day where there are people, I don't feel the need to seek that out. But, you know, some people, this is their way of meeting people, through friends and through acquaintances. So, you know, it's one idea. But there is one piece of advice that I'll give, even though I've not really used this technique all that much. Don't let your potential insecurity kind of hold you back. Like, if you do happen to get a girl's number that you're attracted to and you're talking to her through private message or texting at nighttime or whatever, don't say things like, hey, if I'm annoying you, just let me know. Try and avoid that type of like needy insecurity. You want to give people an out, but at the same time not come across as insecure if they are voluntarily talking to you. You want to maybe up front you can say that, hey, look, you know, just let me know if you're not interested, or something like that. Whatever kind of tactful way you can inject it in there. But once that does happen, once you've, you know, started talking to a person, don't worry about the fact that you might be stifling them or making them uncomfortable. Try and not worry about that. Don't worry about double texting somebody. Don't play that little game of cat and mouse, okay? Just, you know, be as upfront as possible, push for what you want, and as long as they do have an out, that's all that matters. And yeah, very simple stuff, really. But let's say, because this video is about knowing when it's over, let's say that's not happening. Let's say that you're not meeting anybody. You don't know the right people to meet a girl at, or you've tried this, and every girl that you've given your number to, or every time you've taken a risk and asked that girl at work for her number, and you've been shot down. So that means that nightclubs, dating apps, and meeting people in person, all of these things thus far have not worked for you Well, the only other option you really have left at that point is travel maxing, or geomaxing as it's sometimes colloquially referred to. This is when it's not just a JBW thing, it's not just a white guy thing, it's a Western thing. I've seen non-white guys do this, where they essentially relocate from their home country, whether it be America or Canada or Australia, whatever, right? Places where they just blend in with the crowd, and they move to these other countries, it doesn't matter what country it is, it varies. I'm not really an expert on this. There are other guys out there that have more knowledge of, which countries are best. And they meet women locally because they are automatically perceived the day they get off the plane as being exotic or, just different to the local population. You can look at this as kind of sleazy. It does have a bad reputation. And obviously there are guys out there that give it a bad reputation. But all in all, if you look at it through a humanistic lens, it doesn't have to be this like sleazy, predatorial thing at all. The world's a big place. There's an old saying that there's someone for everyone. Well, why does that someone have to be in your home country? And yes, I know the term there's someone for everyone is a quote, but you get the idea, right? Like, I know it is a little bit of a controversial subject because some people do kind of view it as like, these guys are moving to these countries and stealing the local women. In fact, this is a very weird tidbit that literally none of you watching this probably know about. But one of the biggest conflicts in New Zealand's domestic history was actually a skirmish that broke out between the American GIs and the New Zealand soldiers in Wellington in 1943, when the American soldiers were essentially sleeping with all of the local women, and the New Zealand soldiers grew so resentful that it actually created a skirmish between the troops, the troops that were both fighting to repel the Japanese out of the South Pacific. They actually got into a brawl with one another. And yeah, I know it's hard to believe, but this was the biggest skirmish to take place physically on New Zealand's soil, even bigger than the conflict between the British that arrived in the 18th century or 17th century, I forget. There was several landings, but even bigger than the conflict that broke out between the native people of New Zealand, the Māoris, and the white settlers. Even bigger than their conflict was this conflict between New Zealand and American GIs over women, because the New Zealand women were in awe of them. And I heard testimonials of this when I was in high school. I saw a documentary called New Zealand at War, and it featured this conflict. And yeah, I remember the New Zealand women, who are now old ladies, talking about them, and they said that, these Americans arrived, and they had such nice suits, and they were so handsome, and they talked about how it was like, it was like Hollywood coming to New Zealand, which pretty much proves my point, by the way, that not all of travel maxing is about the fact that you're of a more attractive ethnic persuasion of the local population. Obviously, that does play a role, but it's not like that. It's not like that was what was happening when the American GIs basically picked up all of the local New Zealand women in the 1940s. It's not like the New Zealand soldiers were anything other than 97 to 99% white themselves. So you get the idea. Part of it's intrinsic, part of it's cultural. It's a tool in a toolbox. That's what geomaxing is. And obviously, it's going to depend on what ethnic persuasion you are, what country you're from, how tall you are, how much money you have, how many languages you speak. All of these things are factors in your ability to relocate to a different country and try and meet women there if you're not having success at home. That's ultimately what it boils down to, is all of these different variables. It's a tool in a toolbox that can be used more readily and more easily depending on who you are and what you have access to. But let's say it doesn't work, because the whole point of today's video is knowing when it's over. Let's say it doesn't work. Let's say that geomaxing is something that you have tried and it didn't work, or you're unable to do it or unwilling to do it, whatever the case may be. Let's say that this is just not going to happen. What other options do you have? Well, the answer is none. It is pretty much over for you at that point. Obviously, the only other option left is paying for it directly, which, hey, that works for a lot of guys. But when I'm talking about it being over, I'm talking about from the perspective of playing the game, joining the dating circus. If none of these four ways or methodologies, whatever you want to put it, if none of these methodologies work, then the only other option you have left is paying for it. And at that point, it's pretty much over as far as playing the game is concerned. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this is literally the only way to meet people. I'm sure that there are variations of these, like, this is kind of getting off on a bit of a tangent, but I did know a guy once when I was at university. His MO was to meet girls around like the university campus and be completely friend zoned. He would deliberately like almost kind of downplay the degree of interest that he would have whenever he would meet a girl. Like he wouldn't show any signs that he was attracted to each girl that he met. But I guess because he was like a high tier normie, he was able to allow for the natural kind of chemistry that would build up, you know, after a few drinks, not like getting them drunk like a predator, but, you know, having a few drinks himself, just kind of loosening up, so to speak. And he would have it so they would be each other's drunken mistake that night, you know, like they would be those friends that kind of cringe and laugh weeks later about the night they hooked up together. He would deliberately just kind of be the friend zone and allow for the fact that inevitably natural chemistry would build up, and these girls wouldn't see him as like this guy that's chasing them. They wouldn't, you know, play hard to get or anything. They would just be friends and just hang out together, and he would let things happen naturally. So everyone has their own, you know, variation of these four methods. You know, social circle maxing could include meeting people at work or latching on to a more popular friend. Not that that's necessarily a great strategy. Like, for example, I was listening to a video the other day by a smaller YouTuber, has a couple of hundred subs, Travis Blackpill, I think his name is. He sounds like a more depressed version of Face and LMS, and he was talking about the infinite, he talked about how he spent months and months carefully cultivating a social circle, like hanging out outside of, I think it was like football practices or something like that for months at a time, carefully like constructing a social facade of being a popular, outgoing guy, and eventually kind of worming his way into a friend group, only to discover that it didn't actually work as far as like raising his social status, that the guys would treat him well, but it didn't actually help him with women. But, you know, I've had quite a few Chad friends over the years who have sworn to me that they could get any one of their less attractive, less fortunate friends a girl if they wanted to. Like, you know, if you come out with me, bro, you'll be fine, bro. I'll hook you up, bro. You'll be sweet, bro. Don't worry about it. You know, I've had Chad friends like that when I was younger, so I know the lines. And I've had dating coaches also tell me that one of their clients is a 4 out of 10, but you know, by the end of the night, he was doing better than me, bro. So I've heard tales, but I don't know how much stock to put into it. The point is, these are pretty much the big ways of meeting people, meeting girls, whatever, or just anyone. This is true for women as well, except for escort maxing. In fact, it was actually travel maxing that used to be the big one for women before dating apps came along. You know, prior to 2012, whenever a girl would want to cut loose, so to speak, it would usually be on a big holiday. I think that was part of the appeal. I remember when I was in Auckland, and I would bump into girls that would, you know, they were traveling from Europe or whatever. They were always like in the mood to meet a hot guy. Unfortunately, I seldom was that hot guy, but, you know, whenever I would drunkenly talk to them, they would always like tell me about, not in detail, but, you know, I always got the sense, based on what they were saying, that they were on the prowl for Chad. But when you would meet a girl from the actual city that I was in, Auckland, it wasn't really as common. You know, you didn't really meet girls like that. So I think that in the old day it used to be travel maxing for women, but sort of dating apps kind of took over for that to a large extent. But yeah, if you're a guy, pretty much any one of these strategies this pretty much encompasses the main ones. And anything outside of this would have to be some sort of niche that I can't think of. Like, maybe you could become dictator of North Korea. I heard that old Kim Jong-un has his own harem. I heard that after several years of trying to be faithful to his wife, that he finally snapped and decided to resume operations with his harem from a few years prior. That's what I think I read somewhere. So, you know, you could always become a dictator, bro. Anyway, I think it might be time to wrap up the video. Once I start making dictator jokes, then I think it's time to call it a wrap. So there is one kind of final thing I want to say, right? I know it sounds like a giant cope, but there really, really is more to life than just ascending and getting girlfriends or getting laid or whatever, right? Don't get me wrong, it is a big part of life. But, for the most part, I'm still very much against the kind of LDAR. I'm very much against lying down and rotting. I don't think that's necessary. It is only a small part of life to have a girlfriend and sleep around. And I would say the same thing to a woman if she missed out on her ability to have children. I would say, there's still so many other things in life that you can do. You don't need to be depressed just because other people are depressed about it. So much of the things that we want is actually just society convincing us that we want them. That's what a large part of consumerism is. Most people would be happier if they could fit all of their possessions in a suitcase. But yeah, a lot of people, they get kind of conditioned from a young age to think that they want things that they don't actually need. And I know this is getting kind of like off track at the final stages of the video, but when you think about it, who you are as a person is quite an esoteric thing. We sometimes think that we are the sum total of all of our memories, but those memories are just our environment reflected back at us, or sometimes we think that we are what we see, But again, that's just your environment reflected back into your eyes. Your memories could have easily been 100% different if you'd been, made a different decision when you were 5 years old. So yeah, for the time being, just try and find your good copes where you can, and try and make the most of the time that you have left on this earth, because you don't want to throw away your one chance of the billions of years that time exists, the trillions of years that time exists. You're here for 70, 80 years? You don't want to throw that away because of some minor component of something on Earth that you couldn't achieve, that was like something that was essentially biologically and sociologically conditioned for you to want. You don't want to throw away your 75 years of consciousness just for missing out on that one component. Anyway, I hope today's video was somewhat interesting to listen to, even if it didn't fully apply to your current circumstances. I still hope it was somewhat insightful and still gave you something to think about.